In recent weeks, the United States has seen a sharp increase in immigration enforcement activities, particularly in Minnesota. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is planning a surge of agents to the Twin Cities area targeting Somali immigrants living unlawfully in the U.S. This operation has sparked heated debates about the role of immigrants in Minnesota, and it has ignited fears within the Somali community. The operation is reportedly focusing on individuals who have overstayed their visas or entered the country without proper documentation, intensifying tensions in the local immigrant community. A large portion of the Somali immigrant population in Minnesota has come to the U.S. as refugees, fleeing the violence and instability of their homeland. However, the government's decision to target this specific community has led to protests and widespread criticism. As reports of arrests surface, both Minnesota lawmakers and local activists are rallying against what they see as an unjust crackdown on immigrant communities. Minnesota, a state that has prided itself on being a welcoming place for refugees and immigrants, is now at the center of this controversial operation. Local Somali leaders and immigrant advocacy groups have voiced their concerns, calling the move harmful and discriminatory. They argue that it unfairly targets an already vulnerable group and will only increase the fear and mistrust in immigrant communities. In the midst of the escalating tensions, President Donald Trump has also weighed in on the issue. He has used the operation as an opportunity to criticize the Somali community, claiming that the state of Minnesota is being overrun by immigrants who are causing problems. The president's rhetoric has added fuel to the fire, making it clear that the focus is not just on deporting those who have entered the U.S. unlawfully, but also on the broader issue of immigration in the U.S. While some argue that the enforcement actions are necessary to ensure national security and maintain the integrity of the U.S. immigration system, others see them as a direct attack on the Somali American community in Minnesota. The situation is quickly escalating, and it seems clear that the debate over immigration, particularly Somali immigration, is far from over. Amid the unfolding enforcement operations, President Donald Trump has intensified his criticism of Minnesota's leadership. The president has sharply criticized Governor Tim Walz, calling him incompetent and crooked. Trump claimed that Minnesota, once a beautiful state, had descended into chaos under Walz's leadership. According to the president, the state's immigration policies have been a contributing factor to the alleged decline of Minnesota, and he has accused Walz of allowing immigrants, particularly those from Somalia, to flood into the state. Trump's comments about the state of Minnesota are stark, as he labeled it a hellhole, due to the state's approach to immigration. This inflammatory language is being used to galvanize support among his base while drawing the ire of Minnesota's Democratic leaders. Local lawmakers have responded, defending the integrity of Minnesota's immigrant communities and asserting that their state is still a place of opportunity and prosperity for people from all walks of life. The president's remarks, however, have taken a darker turn as he also accused the state of fraud within its immigration system. He stated that 50% of the visas and refugee programs associated with the Somali community were fraudulent, suggesting that Governor Walz either failed to recognize the issue or turned a blind eye to it. The accusations raised by Trump have fueled fears that Minnesota's refugee and immigration programs are being manipulated or exploited, putting further pressure on the state's leadership to address these claims. This rhetoric has made it clear that the issue of immigration, particularly Somali immigration, is now a focal point in the national conversation. The debate is no longer just about the legitimacy of immigrant status. It is also about how immigration policy impacts local communities and the national fabric as a whole. Critics of the president's approach argue that his harsh rhetoric is exacerbating divisions within the country, particularly along racial and ethnic lines, while others believe it is necessary to address the perceived problems that come with unchecked immigration. At the center of this storm is ILHAN Omar, the Somali American congresswoman from Minnesota, who has become one of the most prominent voices on immigration issues in the U.S. Omar has long been a target of criticism from conservatives, particularly for her outspoken views on U.S. foreign policy and domestic immigration reform. As a member of Congress, Omar has been an advocate for the rights of immigrants and refugees, speaking out against the harsh treatment many face in the U.S. and pushing for reforms to the immigration system. However, in the midst of the current immigration crackdown, Omar has found herself under intense scrutiny for her own immigration history. Accusations have surfaced alleging that she married her brother to gain U.S. citizenship, an accusation that has sparked a heated national debate about the legitimacy of her status in the country. While Omar has denied these allegations, they have become a central point in the conversation about her role in Congress and her place in the U.S. Critics of Omar argue that if these allegations are true, it would constitute a major violation of immigration laws, potentially rendering her a fraudulent citizen. Many conservatives have called for her deportation, claiming that she should not be allowed to remain in the U.S. if she obtained her citizenship through fraudulent means. On the other hand, Omar's supporters dismiss these allegations as politically motivated attacks designed to discredit her and undermine her political influence. The situation has now reached a tipping point, with law enforcement agencies reportedly investigating Omar's past to determine whether she obtained her U.S. citizenship through fraudulent means. The investigation into her immigration status has intensified in recent days, with reports suggesting that Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, is looking into whether Omar is legally allowed to stay in the U.S. The investigation has raised serious questions about the future of Omar's political career, with some even speculating that she could face deportation if the allegations are substantiated. As investigations into Ilhan Omar's past continue, the focus has shifted to the claims that she married her brother in order to gain U.S. citizenship. These allegations have been circulating for years, but they have gained renewed attention in the wake of ICE's enforcement operations in Minnesota. According to those pushing for Omar's deportation, her case is a clear example of immigration fraud that should not be allowed to go unchecked. If the allegations are true, it would mean that Omar entered the U.S. under false pretenses, violating U.S. immigration laws in the process. The accusations suggest that she may have used a fraudulent marriage to bypass the normal immigration process, a move that could result in her being stripped of her citizenship and deported. These claims have been investigated by several agencies, including Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, who are reportedly reviewing the case files to determine if there is enough evidence to move forward with legal action. For many critics of Omar, this potential revelation is a damning indictment of her character and an example of the corruption that they believe permeates immigrant communities. They argue that if she is found to have committed fraud, she should be held accountable, regardless of her political status or public influence. Some conservatives have even suggested that if Omar were a Republican, she would already have been deported by now, pointing to what they see as a double standard in how the law is applied to different groups. Omar's supporters, however, maintain that these allegations are unfounded and politically motivated. They argue that the scrutiny on Omar's immigration status is an attempt to discredit her and silence her voice in Congress. They also point out that there is no concrete evidence linking Omar to the alleged fraudulent marriage, and that she should not be judged based on rumors or unsubstantiated claims. For them, the focus should be on her work as a legislator, not her personal life or immigration status. The controversy surrounding Ilhan Omar's potential deportation is already having far-reaching political implications. The growing scrutiny of Omar's immigration status has sparked outrage among her supporters, many of whom see the investigation as a politically motivated attack. Protests have erupted in Minnesota, with demonstrators rallying in defense of the Congresswoman and calling for an end to the investigation. These protests have highlighted the deep divisions within the country over immigration policy and the treatment of immigrants. Supporters of Omar argue that she is being unfairly targeted because of her race, religion, and political views, while opponents contend that she should be held accountable for any alleged violations of immigration law. As the investigation continues, the debate over Omar's future in the U.S. is becoming more polarized, with little common ground between the two sides. The political fallout from this situation could be significant. If Omar is deported, it would not only be a major blow to her personally but also to the broader Somali American community in Minnesota. Many fear that her deportation could set a dangerous precedent, signaling that even high-profile immigrants, including elected officials, are not safe from deportation if their immigration status is questioned. This would further embolden those who are pushing for stricter immigration policies and could lead to increased pressure on other immigrant communities across the U.S. On the other hand, if Omar is allowed to remain in the U.S., it could be seen as a victory for immigrant rights advocates, who argue that her case is emblematic of the broader struggle for justice and equality for all immigrants. However, this outcome would likely provoke backlash from conservatives, who would view it as a failure to hold Omar accountable for her alleged actions. Immigration has become one of the most divisive issues in U.S. politics, with the debate intensifying under the Trump administration. The focus on Somali immigrants in Minnesota, particularly those who are living in the U.S. unlawfully, has brought the issue to the forefront of national discussions. As more immigrants, including Ilhan Omar, face scrutiny over their legal status, the debate over how to handle illegal immigration is becoming a defining issue for the upcoming election cycle. For many conservatives, the call for stricter immigration enforcement is seen as necessary to protect national security and preserve American values. They argue that the U.S. should prioritize the needs of its citizens and ensure that immigration policies are fair and transparent. For liberals, however, the fight for immigrant rights is a matter of human dignity and justice. They argue that immigrants, regardless of their legal status, contribute to the country in numerous ways and deserve protection and respect. As the political climate surrounding immigration continues to heat up, both sides are becoming increasingly entrenched in their positions. Proponents of stricter immigration policies argue that the S cannot afford to continue allowing immigrants to enter the country unlawfully, while advocates for immigrant rights contend that the nation's history of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers should not be forgotten. In the case of ILHAN Omar, the debate over immigration policy has become personal. As an immigrant who rose to political prominence, Omar represents both the promise and the challenges of America's immigration system. Her case has become a microcosm of the larger national conversation about immigration and how the U.S. should balance compassion with security concerns. As the deportation saga involving ILHAN Omar unfolds, protests have erupted in Minnesota and across the country in defense of immigrant rights. Local activists have rallied against the government's actions, claiming that deportation efforts like these are an attack on immigrant communities and their right to remain in the U.S. Many of these protests have taken place outside airports, where deportation flights are reportedly increasing in frequency. The protesters are calling for an end to the deportation flights, which they claim are separating families and spreading fear in immigrant neighborhoods. One notable protester, Nick Benson, a flight tracker from Minnesota, has been following the growing number of deportation flights, tracking them on social media and highlighting their impact. According to Benson, the number of deportation flights has increased dramatically, from just one a week to 2 or 3 times per week. This surge in deportation flights has contributed to the fear and anxiety that is sweeping through immigrant communities in Minnesota. Protesters have been vocal in their opposition to these deportations, with many expressing their belief that the government is unfairly targeting vulnerable individuals and families. In their view, these deportations are not about upholding the rule of law. Rather, they are about instilling fear and dividing communities. The protests show no signs of slowing down, as local residents continue to demand that their voices be heard. The protests in Minnesota are part of a broader movement that is challenging the Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies. Many of the protesters view deportation as an act of cruelty, aimed at punishing families for trying to create a better life in the U.S. They argue that deportations tear apart families and create unnecessary hardship for people who have been living in the U.S. for years, sometimes even decades. In Minnesota, the Somali community has been particularly vocal in its opposition to deportations, citing the widespread fear and uncertainty that the ongoing enforcement actions are causing. The community is pushing back against the narrative that Somali immigrants are a threat to American society. Instead, they argue that they are productive members of their local communities, contributing to the economy and society in meaningful ways. The debate over deportation has become even more heated as the focus shifts to high-profile cases like ILHAN Omar's. If Omar is deported, it could set a precedent for other immigrant groups, making it clear that no one, no matter their status or public profile, is safe from deportation. This prospect has galvanized further protests, with activists warning that such actions will only lead to further divisions within the country. The growing movement against deportations is gaining momentum, but it remains to be seen how successful it will be in changing immigration policy in the U.S. The outcome of ILHAN Omar's case will likely have a significant impact on the trajectory of this movement, determining whether or not it can continue to challenge the administration's policies effectively. The Somali community in Minnesota has been particularly impacted by the ongoing deportation efforts. Many members of this community are fearful of being separated from their families and forced to return to a country that they fled due to violence and instability. The community's resistance to deportations has been growing stronger, as activists continue to speak out against the perceived injustices they are facing. In addition to the emotional toll, deportations are also creating economic hardship for many Somali families. Immigrants often work in low-paying jobs that are critical to the local economy, and their removal can have a ripple effect on the broader community. Supporters of the Somali community argue that deporting immigrants who have been living in the U.S. for years is not only cruel, but also economically detrimental. At the same time, critics of the Somali community's resistance to deportations argue that the U.S. has a responsibility to uphold its immigration laws and ensure that only those who enter the country legally are allowed to stay. The clash between these two perspectives highlights the growing divide over immigration policy in the U.S., and the tension is unlikely to subside anytime soon. As the controversy surrounding ILHAN Omar's immigration status continues to unfold, the debate over immigration in the U.S. shows no signs of abating. Whether or not Omar will be deported remains uncertain, but her case has highlighted the broader issues surrounding immigration enforcement and the treatment of immigrant communities in America. The growing resistance to deportations, combined with the increasing number of deportation flights and protests, suggests that immigration will remain a key issue in U.S. politics for the foreseeable future. If Omar is indeed deported, it will likely lead to a wave of protests and increased political polarization, further complicating the already contentious immigration debate. In the end, the question of whether ILHAN Omar will be deported may be just the beginning of a much larger conversation about the future of immigration in the U.S. The outcome of her case could have far-reaching implications, both for the Somali American community and for immigrant communities across the country. As this story continues to develop, one thing is certain: the future of U.S. immigration policy hangs in the balance. The controversy surrounding ILHAN Omar's potential deportation is only amplifying the already stark political polarization in the United States. Immigration, which has long been a divisive issue, has become even more heated as the situation in Minnesota plays out. Media outlets on both sides of the political spectrum have seized on the story, framing it in ways that reflect their editorial biases and perspectives. On the conservative side, some media channels are highlighting the alleged fraud in Omar's immigration case, presenting her possible deportation as a necessary consequence of breaking the law. These outlets often emphasize the broader message that illegal immigration should not be tolerated and that elected officials, no matter their status, must be held accountable. The rhetoric is strong, with some commentators arguing that Omar's case is a reflection of larger issues in the immigration system and an opportunity to restore the integrity of U.S. laws. On the liberal side, however, the coverage is focused on defending Omar and framing the accusations as politically motivated attacks on a prominent immigrant legislator. Liberal media often stress the divisive nature of immigration enforcement and the negative impact it has on communities. They view her potential deportation as a symbol of the systemic injustices facing immigrants in the U.S., particularly those who come from war-torn and economically struggling countries like Somalia. This media-driven polarization is only deepening the rift between the two sides, with each camp interpreting the events through different ideological lenses. For supporters of stricter immigration policies, the case serves as a reminder of the importance of enforcing the law. For advocates of immigrant rights, it highlights the need for more humane policies and protections for people like Omar, who have contributed positively to American society. This divide is playing out on social media, in the halls of Congress, and in communities across the country, as both sides battle for control of the narrative. Beyond the political spectacle and media coverage, the real-world impact of deportations on local communities in Minnesota cannot be overlooked. For many Somali immigrants, Minnesota has been a place of refuge, a place to start anew after fleeing the violence and devastation of the Somali Civil War. Over the years, Somali immigrants have made significant contributions to the state's culture, economy, and social fabric. However, the current wave of deportations has cast a shadow over these achievements, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. The Somali community in Minnesota is particularly vulnerable, with many members fearing that their families will be torn apart by deportation. Some have been in the U.S. for decades, having arrived as children or young adults. The idea of being forced to leave the only home they've ever known is an unimaginable prospect. These deportations are not only legal matters, they have personal and emotional consequences that affect entire families. Many of those who are facing deportation have built lives in Minnesota, raising families, working in local businesses, and contributing to the community in a variety of ways. For those who are targeted by ICE operations, the situation is even more difficult. As one local activist pointed out, the fear created by these deportations is palpable. People don't know whether they will see their families tomorrow or if they will be torn apart by immigration authorities. This fear has been compounded by the increase in ICE enforcement activity, which has left the community on edge. The ongoing deportations are destabilizing families and communities, which makes it harder for people to focus on their lives and work without the looming threat of being uprooted. At the same time, it's important to recognize the broader societal impact of these deportations. Somali immigrants are not just part of Minnesota's social fabric, they are key contributors to the local economy. Somali-owned businesses have become integral to the state's commercial landscape, creating jobs and providing services to a wide range of customers. In fact, many immigrants contribute significantly to the state's tax revenue, healthcare systems, and educational institutions. The disruption caused by mass deportations may have a ripple effect that goes beyond the immigrant community, affecting the state's economy and social stability. The debate surrounding ILHAN Omar's potential deportation is part of a much broader national conversation on immigration reform. For years, the U.S. immigration system has been criticized for its complexity, inefficiency, and inconsistent enforcement. The situation in Minnesota, however, has brought these issues into sharp focus, as the country grapples with how to balance national security, economic needs, and human compassion. One of the core issues at stake is how the U.S. addresses immigration from countries experiencing conflict and instability. Somalia, from which many of Minnesota's Somali immigrants have come, is just one example of a country in which long-standing violence and political instability have created mass displacement. Many Somali refugees have come to the U.S. seeking safety and a fresh start, but the debate has now shifted to whether the U.S. U.S. is responsible for providing this refuge or whether the country needs to prioritize stricter border controls. The broader question is whether the current immigration system is functioning in the best interests of both immigrants and the American public. Those advocating for stricter immigration policies argue that the system is being exploited, with too many people entering the U.S. unlawfully and placing a strain on social services and public resources. On the other hand, immigrant rights activists argue that the U.S. has a moral obligation to provide asylum and support to people fleeing persecution, especially when they have already established lives and communities in the U.S. In the case of ILHAN Omar, many argue that the legal complexities of her situation represent the flaws in the broader immigration system. For some, the question of her deportation highlights the need for comprehensive immigration reform that addresses issues such as visa fraud, the citizenship process, and family reunification. But reforming the system is no easy task, especially with political gridlock in Washington. The increasing focus on individual cases like Omar's is putting additional pressure on lawmakers to take action and overhaul the immigration system. As the debate continues, the outcome of Ilhan Omar's case could serve as a barometer for the nation's broader stance on immigration. Will the U.S. continue to enforce strict immigration policies, or will it seek a more compassionate approach that considers the contributions of immigrants to society? The resolution of Omar's case, along with similar cases, will play a significant role in shaping the future direction of U.S. immigration policy.